Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown here in Langley, British Columbia.
And here I am 2 blocks away from where you were last night. I see you wearing the ghost t-shirt swag that you picked up.
Well, actually, this is one that I've had. I have like 9 ghost shirts.
So Mike went to a ghost concert. I have no idea what they do or who they are, but...
They call it a ritual, and it's, you know, if your parents are very Christian people, they would not like ghosts at all because they are straight up satanic.
You're hilarious.
Oh, well. Anyway, I had fun, as did the friend that I took. So, yeah. Cool. And it was Valentine's Day. It was very nice.
Valentine's
Day. So let's get on with it. This is not a Valentine's Day show, so...
Absolutely not. Why are you doing this to me? But let's do it.
Okay, yeah, Matthew got a little frustrated with this one. I got frustrated with it reading about it, so... Yeah.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're 2 ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On a quiet street in Kingston, Ontario, a 92-year-old woman named Henrietta Knight opened her front door on a summer afternoon in 1995. She was violently assaulted during a home invasion, left badly injured, and her house was ransacked. Though she survived the attack and spoke to police, paramedics, and doctors, her health steadily declined, and she died months later. What caused her death and whether it was connected to the assault would linger as an unanswered question for decades. This episode traces the case from its beginnings in eastern Ontario in the mid-1990s through years of silence and uncertainty, leading to a courtroom many years later where the truth proved far harder to define than anyone expected. You're listening to Dark Poutine, episode 407, The Tragic End of Henrietta Knight. On the afternoon of June 2, 1995, Henrietta Knight was at home in her house on McDonald Street in Kingston, Ontario. At 92 years old, she lived alone and had done so for years. She was comfortable on her own, and the routines of the day were the same as they were any other day. Nothing in the hours leading up to the afternoon suggested that anything out of the ordinary was going to happen. At approximately 4 o'clock, someone knocked at the front door. According to police records and later court filings, Ms. Knight believed the knock came from a neighbor. She opened the door. A man forced his way inside, and what followed unfolded quickly and violently. Henrietta was pushed back into her home and struck about the head and face. She was forced into a chair and restrained. Tape was used to bind her wrists to the arm of the chair, and at times her body was held against it. While she was restrained, the man demanded money. When she refused, she was struck again. The assault continued as the man searched the house. The house itself would later tell part of the story. Drawers were pulled out and overturned. Items were scattered across the main floor, papers strewn. There was no indication that the door had been forced open. The scene suggested a hurried search rather than vandalism. At some point, the man cut the tape that bound Henrietta, and she was no longer restrained.
Yeah, I have no patience for this. So
I didn't expect you to.
there's a certain kind of man who likes to think of himself as dangerous or street smart or tough. But if the only person you can overpower is a 92-year-old lady in her own home, you're not dangerous, right? This guy's cowardice with a pulse, you know?
Right.
And whatever story he told himself later, this is what it was. This is a grown man needing someone small in order to feel big, right?
Yeah.
Just terrible. I just feel so badly for this woman.
Yeah, it's grim. Henrietta managed to leave the house and make her way to a neighbor's home. At 4:32 p.m., a 911 call was placed reporting, quote, a beating in progress. Kingston police were dispatched immediately. Constable Deb Wicklum was the first officer to arrive. She reached the neighbor's house at 4:43 p.m. Henrietta was there when she arrived. Wicklum observed that Henrietta had sustained visible injuries. Later testimony described extensive bruising and swelling to her face and head, including what Constable Wicklum referred to as boxed ears, a sign consistent with blunt force trauma. While waiting for paramedics, Constable Wicklum spoke with Henrietta, and Henrietta described what had happened to her and gave a description of the man who entered her home. Wicklum later testified that Henrietta was able to communicate and appeared to understand the questions being asked. Though injured, she was responsive and coherent. An ambulance arrived at 4:59 p.m., less than 30 minutes after the initial emergency call. Paramedic Jeff O'Field conducted the assessment. As part of his duties, O'Field completed an ambulance call report, a document required for every call and used to communicate information to hospital staff. Inside the ambulance, O'Field asked Henrietta what had happened. Based on notes taken during the assessment, he recorded her account. According to that report, Henrietta said she had answered a knock at the door and was pushed inside by a young man. She reported that she was bound to a chair, struck on the left side of her face, and questioned about money while the man searched her house. She told the paramedic that she had been restrained for about 30 minutes before being cut free, and afterward she went to the neighbor's house for help, all consistent with what we know so far. The reason we're repeating this information is because it's important. It shows that Henrietta was very cognizant of what had happened to her and able to communicate that with first responders. O'Field also documented Henrietta's physical condition. She had blood visible on her mouth, her wrists showed avulsions, areas where the upper layer of skin had been torn away, likely from the duct tape that was used to bind her to the chair, and consistent with being tightly bound. Bruising was visible on her face, neck, arms, and hands. Despite the injuries, O'Field recorded that Henrietta was alert and oriented. Her Glasgow Coma Scale score was normal. The Glasgow Coma Scale is a simple scoring system doctors and medical professionals use to determine how awake and responsive someone is after a head injury by checking whether they can open their eyes, speak, and move, among other things. O'Field later testified he had no concerns about Henrietta's ability to communicate at the time. She was transported to the hospital, and there police met her again later that evening. Officers photographed her injuries at approximately 6 p.m. The photographs showed extensive bruising to her face and neck, as well as injuries to her arms, hands, and wrists. 2 police officers spoke with her at the hospital and took notes as she recounted the assault. One officer later testified that the notes were taken verbatim with care to avoid interrupting her as she spoke. The other officer described his notes as non-verbatim, but said accuracy was still the goal. Both officers said that they had no difficulty communicating with her. Henrietta again described the events of the attack and her attacker. but due to her hands being stitched after her injuries, she was unable to sign the account. Henrietta Knight was discharged from the hospital later that evening. While she was there, however, other officers examined her home, looking for evidence. Photographs taken at the scene showed the chair she described, with tape still attached to its arms and back. Newspapers were found beneath it. Drawers throughout the house had been pulled open and emptied, items lay scattered across the rooms, and there were no visible signs of forced entry. Tape collected from the chair was later analyzed. Testing showed DNA consistent with Henrietta's. The scene itself supported her account of being restrained and of the house being searched. By the end of the day, investigators had a clear outline of what had occurred. An elderly woman living alone had answered her door, been assaulted, bound, and robbed in her own home. She had survived the attack and provided multiple accounts within hours of the event. Her injuries were documented. The house showed signs consistent with her description. What investigators did not have was a suspect in custody. Descriptions of the attacker varied slightly between statements but shared common features. Henrietta described a lone white male of slim build, somewhere between his mid-30s and early 40s. She described his hair as light brown or blonde, parted on the side, and his clothing as dark. She said she had never seen him before. As June 2nd came to a close, the case remained open. Henrietta was back home. Police continued to review the evidence gathered that afternoon and evening. The violence had ended, but the investigation had just begun. When June 2nd, 1995 ended, Henrietta was alive. She had survived the assault in her home, spoken to police and paramedics, and returned from the hospital that same night. The immediate crisis had passed. What remained was uncertainty about her injuries, about her recovery, and about what the violence she endured might yet set in motion. In the days following her attack, police continued to document what Henrietta had already described. Her statements from June 2nd were preserved in multiple forms: a paramedic's report, police notebooks, and photographs taken at the hospital. Those early accounts were close in time to the assault and were treated as foundational. On June 3rd, police visited Miss Knight again. This time they spoke with her at her brother's home. The setting was quieter, removed from the urgency of the previous day. Officers noted a change in her presentation. She appeared groggy and soft-spoken. At times she was difficult to hear. One officer thought she may have been affected by medication, though there was no suggestion that she was intoxicated. She appeared to understand questions, but she responded more slowly. During the interview, Henrietta again described the assault. The core details remained the same. A man forced his way into the home, struck her, tied her to a chair, demanded money, and searched the house. She added details she had not previously mentioned, including statements the man allegedly made and threats about burning the house down. She described papers being placed under the chair while she was restrained. She also described the man as saying he was from Montreal. At the same time, some details differed from her earlier statements. Her description of how she had been restrained was slightly different. Her description of the man's hair varied. These changes were noted by police but not treated as unusual. Henrietta was 92 years old. She'd been assaulted, injured, and frightened. Her condition on June 3rd was visibly different from how she appeared on June 2nd. 2 days later, on June 5th, police arranged for a videotape statement at the police station. The interview was conducted under oath. Henrietta was cautioned that lying under oath was a criminal offense. She acknowledged that, and she understood. The video recording captured a woman who appeared frail. Her face showed deep bruising. She had difficulty hearing some of the questions and occasionally appeared confused. At the outset of the interview, she said she could hardly remember what had happened and said she had been very scared. The interview lasted approximately 33 minutes. As the questioning continued, Henrietta was able to describe the assault in general terms. She again spoke about a man coming into her home, pushing her into a chair, and tying her there. She spoke about him wanting money. She struggled to recall specific dialogue. In this statement, she did not mention a gun. When asked directly whether the man had anything with him, she said he did not. Her account of how she escaped shifted during the interview, changing with follow-up questions. At times, she said she walked out on her own. At other points, she said the man cut her free. These inconsistencies would later be examined closely, and at the time, the videotaped statement served a practical purpose. It preserved Henrietta's account in her own words and allowed investigators to observe her demeanor. It also marked the last time she would provide a statement to police. In the weeks that followed, Henrietta Knight's health began to change. On July 1, 1995, she returned to the hospital. The admission was prompted by confusion. She was assessed and monitored and then released on July 3rd. No CT scan was performed during this visit. At that point, her symptoms did not yet point to a clearly catastrophic injury. For an elderly patient, confusion would have many explanations. 10 days later, on July 11th, Henrietta Knight was admitted again. This time a CT scan was ordered. The scan revealed bleeding in her brain. This finding marked a significant development. For the first time since the assault, there was imaging evidence of a serious internal injury. From that point forward, Henrietta Knight did not return home. She remained in the hospital under care as her condition declined. Eventually, she was transferred to a chronic care facility. Over the following months, she continued to deteriorate. On November 4, 1995, she died. Her death forced police and medical professionals to confront a difficult question: whether the injuries she sustained during the June 2nd assault caused or materially contributed to her death 5 months later. The passage of time between the attack and her death complicated the answer. Henrietta was elderly. She had survived the immediate assault. There was no single dramatic medical collapse that could be pointed to as the moment when the attack became fatal. Instead, there was a gradual decline that unfolded over months. For investigators, this created a challenge. The violence of June 2nd was not in dispute. The injuries were documented. Henrietta's statements were preserved. The condition of her home corroborated her account. What was less clear was how to establish causation in a way that would withstand legal scrutiny. Despite those challenges, forensic testing and medical review ultimately led police to conclude that Henrietta Knight's death was linked to the assault. On that basis, the case was formally upgraded to homicide. In January 1996, Kingston police announced publicly they were treating the matter as murder. They turned to the public for help. Quote, "I believe that someone out there knows something, and we'd like them to come forward," Staff Sergeant Jerry Toyle said to the Kingston Whig Standard. Quote, "I do not believe it was random. I believe she was targeted." End quote. The decision to classify the case as a homicide reframed how it was understood. What had initially appeared to be a violent robbery with a surviving victim was now recognized as something more serious. Henrietta Knight had lived for months after the assault, but she had not recovered. Her family supported the renewed appeal. Her brother, Ormond Barry, spoke publicly about the impact of the crime and the hope that it might still be resolved. Quote, "If he can be caught, that would be the best thing that could happen to the family," he said. With the family's approval, police released a photograph of Henrietta Knight taken shortly after the assault. The image showed the extent of her injuries. Investigators hoped it would prompt someone to come forward with information. Despite renewed attention, progress remained limited. The case did not resolve quickly. As time passed, it became part of a growing list of unsolved homicides in Kingston. By the late 1990s, police acknowledged that they believed they knew who was responsible for Henrietta Knight's death, but lacked the evidence needed to proceed. The case was not closed. It was not forgotten, but it remained unresolved.
And this is a part where I always slow down, Mike. When police say, "We know who did it, we just can't prove it," is a powerful statement.
Right.
It sounds confident. Mm-hmm. It sounds reassuring.
Yep.
But it's also opaque. No, based on what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, was there a witness who wouldn't testify, a tip that couldn't be corroborated, a suspect who fit the description? Is it theory that's just hardened over time? Is it somebody that they knew were a troublemaker that they didn't like, so they assumed he was involved?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just because the police say, we know who did it, we just can't prove it. Well, if you can't prove it, then you don't know who did it.
If the evidence isn't there to make the arrest, if you're not confident that you can make an arrest, then you really don't know.
Right. And I get it. But, people you can't just blindly go, oh, the police know who did it. They just can't prove it. Innocent until proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And then when decades pass from this, we know who did it, we just can't prove it, and then the way that there's such a flimsy beginning, and then decades passed, and then they do this type of sting that we're going to talk about. It all feels very, very wobbly to me, to be honest.
It is the nature of this kind of thing. I mean, we see it over and over again. I get messages from people every day who say, yes, this family, in fact, I just got a message today exactly about this kind of thing. The family knows who did it. They know who did it. It just can't be proven yet. So, I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. It's just really a rough situation for everybody.
But it's also theory.
Yeah. Theory is really interesting.
Theory wrapped in emotion.
Or, yeah. The difficulty for police and prosecutors lay not in understanding what had happened on June 2nd, 1995, but in proving beyond a reasonable doubt how that day connected to November 4th of the same year. The law required more than belief. It required evidence that could survive challenge. As years passed, the case continued to surface in discussions of Kingston's cold cases. Periodic reviews are conducted. Advances in forensic science offered hope that older cases might yet be strengthened. In 2005, Kingston police again publicly addressed their unsolved homicides. Police Chief Bill Kloss spoke about Henrietta Knight's case in plain terms, quote, "A woman who lived into her 90s should not have died by violence in her own home," Kloss said. He expressed confidence that the case could still be resolved and cited changes in technology and human behavior as the reasons not to abandon hope. Circumstances change, and as soon as they change, witnesses become unafraid, he said. For the public, Henrietta Knight's case became one more unresolved act of violence in an otherwise quiet city. For the police, it was a file that refused to close. For her family, it was a loss stretched across years, marked by uncertainty and unanswered questions. The assault on June 2nd, 1995 lasted only minutes. Its effects didn't. As the weeks and years passed, what had become a single act of violence grew into something far more complicated. After the break, we'll look at how this case resurfaced years later and the rather expected way police believed they might finally uncover the truth. And we are back at the halfway point, Matthew.
Yeah, what stays with me after this first half isn't just the violence, but it's kind of the slowness. So this poor woman survives, she speaks, she goes home, and then over a month she fades.
Right.
And there's something kind of uniquely cruel about that. Not a single catastrophic moment, but this long decline.
Yeah.
She's 92 years old, and we talk about longevity as victory. Right? Like 92 means you've outlived wars and governments, entire eras of change.
It's a pretty good inning.
Right? And then your life ends not because of time, but because someone decided you were an easy opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this was. And whoever did this, it was an opportunity. And, and then the case starts drifting and years are passing and police say they believe who did it, but they can't prove it, which means the family lives in that strange space between suspicion and certainty.
Yeah.
And the second half, we're moving into something different, right? It's not just who might have done this, but how we're going to talk about is how the system tries to solve the case when memory has degraded, witnesses are gone, and there's only fragments left, right? And, my feelings about these sorts of cases, when the system starts reaching for more aggressive tools, we need to pay attention to how those tools can start to shape the story. Because, it's my belief that the way you exact the truth can matter as much as the truth itself in a lot of ways. So, again, we're talking about yet another Mr. Big case coming up here.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, but not sorry. But anyway. Yeah. For years after Henrietta Knight's death, the case existed in a familiar state of limbo. Police believed it could be solved, but it resisted resolution. Names surfaced quietly, rumors circulated. Nothing moved forward in a way that could sustain charges. Then, long after the events of 1995 had receded from public view, attention returned to a man who had been present in Kingston at the time and whose life had continued to intersect with police in many other ways. His name was Michael Wentworth. He's also known as Michael Verney. By the mid-1990s, Wentworth was already known to police. His criminal history included violence and fraud. He was described in later court records as someone who cultivated the image of a seasoned criminal, confident, streetwise, and eager to present himself as someone who understood how the underworld worked. He was not a man who blended quietly into the background. He talked. He boasted. He told stories. In Kingston, Wentworth moved through a small social circle that included Robert Parker and Parker's wife, Lori Parker. The Parkers would later become significant in the narrative surrounding Henrietta Knight's case, not because of direct involvement in the assault, but because of what Wentworth would later say about them. According to evidence reviewed years later, Wentworth claimed that Lori Parker had told him that Henrietta Knight had money in her home. In his telling, Knight was described as a hoarder, someone who kept cash around the house. This alleged tip would become a central part of the Crown's theory. There were also allegations that Wentworth made admissions in the years after 1995, comments made privately to acquaintances that hinted at involvement in a robbery that had gone wrong. These were not formal confessions, they were fragments, comments that surfaced in conversation, without detail and without corroboration strong enough to move any case forward. At the time, they led nowhere. As years passed, Wentworth's life continued to draw police attention for reasons unrelated to Henrietta Knight. He accumulated convictions. He drifted in and out of custody. The assault on McDonald Street remained part of Kingston's unresolved past. Then, more than 20 years after the attack, police took a different approach. By the late 2010s, Kingston police, working with other agencies, began reviewing long unsolved cases using undercover techniques designed to elicit admissions from suspects who had previously evaded prosecution. One such method was a Mr. Big-style undercover operation. Sorry I had to giggle there, but you know the drill. Mr. Big is a controversial investigative tool that places an undercover officer in the role of a criminal boss and surrounds the target with a fabricated criminal organization. Dark Poutine listeners know the setup well by now. Undercover officers befriend the target, draw them into what appears to be a lucrative criminal network, and create situations that encourage the target to discuss past crimes to demonstrate trustworthiness. The method has been criticized for the risk of false confessions, and Canadian courts require careful scrutiny of any statements obtained in this way. Oh, Matthew, here we are again.
As you know, and as our listeners know, I've never been comfortable with this tactic because for me, a Mr. Big operation doesn't just gather evidence. It creates a world. There's money, Mike, there's hierarchy, there's approval. The target isn't just talking. He's trying to belong, right?
Right, exactly.
He's trying to impress. He's trying to prove that he deserves a seat at the table. And that's not a neutral environment for truth. So when someone starts talking about old crimes inside that setup, right, you have to ask yourself, is this memory or is this man shaping a story to fit the role he thinks will earn him status? Right. And that tension is always sitting there in the background. So,
and we're not saying this guy's not guilty. We're just talking about the situation.
I'm not saying he is or isn't, and I don't know, even after the end of this episode, I don't know if he is or isn't, Mike.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is this way of doing it is just, for me, flat out wrong.
Mm-hmm. So Michael Wentworth became a target of a Mr. Big operation. An undercover officer posed as a criminal associate. Over time, Wentworth was introduced to what he had believed was a larger organization with hierarchy, roles, and expectations. The central figure, the fictional Mr. Big, was presented as someone who could offer protection, money, and status. Wentworth appeared eager to impress. Recordings from the operation would later show him as talkative and expansive. He spoke freely about crime, about how things were done, about his own experiences. He often positioned himself as a mentor, explaining the rules of the street to those he believed were lower in the hierarchy. At the same time, he showed moments of caution. He was not reckless in every conversation. He avoided direct statements when he thought they might be risky. The operation unfolded over months. During that time, Wentworth discussed various aspects of his criminal past. Henrietta Knight's case did not appear immediately. When it surfaced, it did so gradually and with hesitation. In 2019, during conversations with undercover officers, Wentworth began referring to a robbery from the 1990s that had gone bad. He did not initially name the victim. He did not volunteer full details. Instead, he spoke around the event, circling it rather than confronting it directly. According to transcripts reviewed by the court, Wentworth said that he had been tipped off by a woman who later died, Lori Parker, someone who had told him there was money in a house. He described going to the house and restraining an elderly woman. He spoke about duct tape. He spoke about the situation getting out of hand. What stands out in these conversations is not triumph or pride. Wentworth did not describe the event as a success. He expressed discomfort. At times, he described feeling disgusted by what had happened. He spoke about the victim's age. He framed the incident as something that had weighed on him.
Yeah, and you know what? And this complicates it for me as well, right? So yeah. I don't know if he's guilty or not, because this man isn't bragging. He's not chest puffing here. He isn't turning it into some war story. And if anything, he's sounding uneasy or almost ashamed, right?
Right.
And that makes it harder because on one hand, that doesn't fix, in my mind, the structural problem with Mr. Big, right? The environment's still artificial. The incentives are still there, but discomfort isn't usually how people perform to try to gain status, right? If you're auditioning for credibility in a fake criminal organization, you don't typically lead with regret. Right?
Yeah.
Right? You lead with bravado. So I'm in this uncomfortable space where my skepticism about the method runs straight into the tone of what he's actually saying, right? And that's where the court is going to have to live as well.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. At times, Wentworth minimized his role. At others, he seemed to distance himself emotionally from the event. He spoke in general terms, avoiding specifics of what could be checked easily. He did not, for example, consistently name the victim. When he did, it was late in the operation. The undercover officers did not confront him directly with evidence. They allowed him to speak at his own pace. They encouraged storytelling. They rewarded openness with approval and status within the fictional organization. Throughout the operation, Wentworth appeared to enjoy the attention. He liked being seen as knowledgeable and experienced. He liked explaining how crimes worked. Yet he also showed signs of unease when discussing certain topics. Henrietta Knight's case was one of these. When the assault finally emerged clearly in conversation, it did so almost reluctantly. Wentworth described the robbery of an elderly woman, the tip about money, and a situation that escalated. He spoke about tying her up. He spoke about the house being searched. He did not dwell on the details of violence, but he did not deny them either. He also spoke about time, about how long ago it had been, about how the woman later died. His tone was not celebratory. It was reflective, sometimes defensive. He framed the event as something that had stayed with him, something he did not feel proud of. For investigators, these statements were significant. They aligned in broad terms with what was already known about the assault on Henrietta Knight, but they were also incomplete and sometimes inconsistent. They had to be weighed carefully, especially given the method by which they were obtained. By the end of the undercover operation, police believed they had enough to act. The fragments taken together suggested a narrative that had never fully emerged before. A robbery, a tip, an elderly victim, a crime that had gone wrong.
And this is where I slow down again on this, right? So
Yeah.
this wasn't a sealed file, right? The police had gone public years earlier. They released details. They released photographs of her injuries.
Right.
They appealed to the community, and by the late 1990s, they were openly saying they believe who knew was responsible. So if you're that person, right, and if you've been questioned, he didn't say if they had or not, but I bet he was, and you know the police are circling you, these facts aren't abstract to you. So when someone decades later starts describing duct taping an elderly woman in a robbery that went bad, we have to ask the question: is he really revealing something that only the perpetrator would know, or is he assembling a story of what's already been made publicly available, right? And that doesn't mean he's innocent. It means that the source detail matters, because, you know, Mike, duct tape, like they always use duct tape. Like if I was faking a story, I'd say, yeah, I use duct tape, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so this is just thin to me. It's thin that they would arrest him on this.
Police and prosecutors weren't exactly sure about how these fragments would stand up in court. Michael Wentworth had talked. He talked quite a lot. But what he'd said was not a single clean confession. It was a collection of statements shaped by time, memory, and circumstance. Whether those statements could carry the weight of what happened in 1995 would depend on what came next. For now, what mattered was that after more than 2 decades, Henrietta Knight's case was no longer such a mystery. When police arrested Michael Wentworth in 2019, the moment did not arrive with flashing lights or dramatic press conferences. It came quietly, decades after the crime itself, at the end of a long undercover operation built on patients' recorded conversations and fragments of memory. By the time Wentworth was taken into custody, the case of Henrietta Knight had already lived several lives. First as a violent robbery, then as a homicide, and finally as a question the justice system would be asked to answer long after the people involved had aged, moved on, or even died. Wentworth was charged with manslaughter in connection with Henrietta Knight's death. The charge reflected the Crown's position that while there was no evidence he intended to kill her, his actions during the robbery caused injuries that ultimately led to her death months later. At trial, the Crown laid out a simple narrative that masked a complicated reality. On June 2, 1995, Wentworth entered Knight's home intending to rob her. During that robbery, he assaulted her, struck her in her head, and bound her to a chair. Those injuries, the Crown argued, caused bleeding in her brain. Though Knight survived the initial assault, her condition deteriorated over the following months, ending in her death in November 1995. The chain was long, but the Crown said it was unbroken. The defense rejected that. From their perspective, the case was built on weak links and assumptions stretched too far. They argued that Wentworth's statements during the undercover operation were unreliable, shaped by inducements and the desire to impress people he believed were criminals. They pointed to inconsistencies in Knight's descriptions of her attacker and the events of the assault. They emphasized what was missing: no eyewitness who identified Wentworth, no forensic evidence placing him inside the house, and no clear medical moment tying the assault directly to her death. Much of the trial turned on evidence that Henrietta Knight herself could no longer explain. She'd given 4 statements to authorities between June 2nd and June 5th, 1995. By the time of the trial, those statements were the only way her account could enter the courtroom. The Crown sought to admit them for their truth. The defense objected. This is where the trial slowed down and narrowed its focus. Before a verdict could be reached, the court had to decide what evidence the jury, or in this case, the judge, was even allowed to consider. The judge examined Knight's statements one by one. These were admitted as spontaneous utterances, statements made under stress of a traumatic event before there is time to fabricate. Henrietta was injured, frightened, and still reeling from what happened. The court found that the circumstances themselves reduced the risk of invention. Later statements required a different analysis. Henrietta's videotaped statement given under oath at the police station on June 5th was scrutinized carefully. By then, she appeared frailer and sometimes confused. Her memory faltered on details. Still, the statement was recorded in full, given under oath, and preserved exactly as it was spoken. The judge ruled that these safeguards, combined with corroborating evidence, made the statement reliable enough to be admitted. Not all hearsay survived the test. The Crown also sought to rely on hearsay related to the autopsy and medical conclusions. The judge drew a firm line. While the medical evidence itself was important, the pathologist's report could not be admitted for its truth without meeting the same reliability standards. Necessity alone was not enough, and that evidence was excluded. With the scope of evidence set, the court turned to the hardest question in the case: causation. Henrietta Knight did not die on the day she was assaulted. She lived for months afterward. During that time, her condition declined. The defense argued that at 92 years old, many things could explain that decline. Age, pre-existing conditions, or unrelated medical events could not be ruled out. The Crown countered that the violent head trauma to an elderly woman is not neutral. The CT scan showed bleeding on the brain combined with the absence of any intervening trauma supporting a causal link between the assault and her death. The judge weighed the medical record carefully. This was not a case of certainty, it was a case of probability and proof. In the end, the court found that the Crown had established causation beyond a reasonable doubt. The assault was not the sole cause of death, but it was a significant contributing cause. That was enough in law. The undercover operation presented its own challenges. Mr. Big-style investigations are controversial for a reason. Courts know that people can exaggerate or fabricate stories to gain approval or reward. The judge examined how the operation was conducted, what inducements were offered, and how Wentworth spoke about the past. What mattered was not how much Wentworth talked, but what he said that aligned with the known facts. His references to a tip about money, an elderly woman, duct tape, and a robbery that went wrong were not details easily pulled from public reporting. The judge found that, taken together, Wentworth's statements had a probative value. They were not treated as a clean confession, but as one piece of a larger evidentiary puzzle.
So the case has been in the media, photos were published, the fact that she was elderly was public, the duct tape isn't some exotic calling card, it's practically a default tool for half the robberies we recover, right? Mm-hmm. So when we say these aren't details easily pulled from public reporting, I kind of have to interrogate that, right? Are these really uniquely insider facts, or are they just the kind of broad elements someone could piece together from news coverage and general criminal know-how, right? And that looseness doesn't automatically undo the case, but it does mean that, this is not airtight. It's not even close to airtight.
I don't think Mr. Big is ever airtight, honestly. Yeah.
I don't know if he's guilty or not, but I don't think I could have convicted based on this.
Identification of the perpetrator remained imperfect. Henrietta Knight's descriptions of her attacker shifted at the margins. No one placed Wentworth at her door on June 2, 1995, but identification does not always come from a single source. Circumstantial evidence can be enough. The alleged tip, the details Wentworth provided, and the lack of a credible alternative explanation all weighed into the analysis. When the verdict came, it reflected the limits of what the court could say with confidence. Michael Wentworth was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of Henrietta Knight. The conviction did not claim certainty about every detail. It did not pretend time had been kind to memory or evidence. It acknowledged uncertainty where it existed and responsibility where it could be proven. The judge's reasons were careful and restrained. They recognized that memory degrades, that accounts change, and that elderly victims present particular challenges for the justice system. The law does not demand perfect stories. It demands proof beyond a reasonable doubt on the elements that matter. Justice, when it arrives, decades after a crime, cannot restore what was lost. It cannot return a woman to the home she left on a stretcher or give her family the years that followed. What it can do is acknowledge harm and assign responsibility even when certainty has been eroded by time. Henrietta Knight's story is a reminder of how violence against elderly people often unfolds quietly behind closed doors and how long it can take for those acts to be fully reckoned with. Her voice survived only in recordings and notes, yet it carried far enough to be heard in a courtroom many years later. Henrietta Knight's family did not give public statements after the conviction. Her brother, Ormond Berry, was long gone by the time the case was resolved. There were no press conferences, no expressions of triumph. Justice was quietly served.
Or was it?
Or was it, yeah. And that is it for Dark Poutine episode 407, The Tragic End of Henrietta Knight.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Alrighty, here is our first voicemail. Let's have a listen.
This is Marion from Queens, New York, and I just finished listening to the Fosterville murders. The guy who murdered his two nieces and served in World War I. Well, he was a little loopy before he went to war, so that whatever happened in the trenches, there was something there. The guy was insane, but he wasn't any less insane than a lot of the people that came back, except that he murdered. And the same thing happened after Vietnam. How many guys came back and murdered people from post-traumatic stress, and how many serial killers came in the 70s with people coming back from Vietnam. Anyway, next week I get some money, so I'll send you some donut money. So Cat the dog says hello, and she's got two new kitten friends. So take care, everybody. Glad to listen to your show. Bye.
I love hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks, Marion.
Two new friends.
Two new friends. The Fosterville murders, that was episode 354, so she's digging deep.
My husband and I have been watching this show called Fear Thy Neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And almost every third episode, the neighbor who kills the other neighbor is an ex-Marine. Right?
Oh,
and
weird.
I said to my husband, like, I don't think people coming back from war are getting enough mental health help.
Right.
And that's what she was kind of talking about there. I think if I'm sorry, but if your country sends you to war, they should do some pretty heavy duty mental health help afterwards. And I don't think these poor ex-soldiers are getting the help they need.
No, I don't think they are. I mean, even in our modern times, it's kind of proven that these guys are forgotten after they've done their service.
Yeah, it's really sad. And of course, I'm not saying every ex-Marine is going to kill their neighbor at all, but some people have seen some terrible, terrible things, right? And suffering from PTSD and everything else, and they just seem to be left in the wind, and it's sad.
Yep.
You know, you ask them to do that stuff, you should support them afterwards.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Marion. We really appreciate you
Thank you.
your calls. And that accent is fantastic. So, yeah.
Should say she doesn't have an accent that we do.
Exactly. We're the ones with the accent. Yeah. Here's another.
Hi, my name's Chris, and I am just commenting on the podcast that you did on Brock Graham, the murders of Lynn Dugan and Patty Ducharme. I was one of Brock Graham's karate students in Surrey in 1992. In 1993, we moved to Williams Lake, and my father and I were watching the news and watched Brock Graham get on a helicopter to go off to prison in handcuffs. My father recognized him and asked me who he was, and I explained that he was in fact my karate teacher. I still have the yellow belt that he gave me when we were in class in Surrey, and years and years later, I was sitting in our kitchen here in Campbell River, and my fiance was listening to Dark Poutine and mentioned that the podcast that she was listening to sounded a lot like the story that I had told her. Anyways, wanted to check in and say hello and thank you very much. I'm a listener. And it's just very interesting that this story is so close to me, and then it actually happened and it came out in the way that it did. I'm at an older age. So anyway, thank you very much. And I just want to say hello, and yeah, it'll be very interesting to talk to you about it. Thanks. Bye.
Great.
Well, thanks, Chris. If you want to send me an email at darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have a chat with you about it.
I wonder if Chris kept up his karate. So this morning I was recording with Olin, the Two Older Pure Gold Movie podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Olin is something like an 8-time black belt now.
In what? Taekwondo?
Karate.
In karate? Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
So don't tangle with Olin is what you're
yeah,
saying.
no. He has like a whole like dojo thing with like fake knives and stuff for like practicing taking stuff away from people.
So the episode that Chris is referring to, it's episode 93 and 94, and I spoke
way before me.
Yeah, way before you. He's dug deep, way back into the hundreds or into the double digits. The double digits. Yeah, so Cheryl Duggan, the sister of Lynn Duggan, the twin sister of Lynn Duggan, actually came on the show. And
I remember. I did listen to that episode.
Yeah, and Lynn is fantastic, and she still advocates for Brock Graham being kept in jail, although he has not been, which is pretty interesting. So, day parole for this double murderer. Anyway, oh boy. We could go on about that for a long time, but
yes.
we don't need to today.
No, and everyone knows our opinion anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome.
And we don't have any donut money donors or new patrons this week, but we love you folks, and we know you love us anyway.
Patreon,
yes, exactly. Patreon. Yeah, and we're starving for donuts.
Donut holes, the actual holes.
Every time I do these now, I hear that guy's voicemail where he says, "You guys suck for asking for money. You guys suck."
Is he living rent-free in your head?
Yeah, he's living rent-free in my head. Anyway, you know what he sucks for? Calling somebody up and saying that shit. You suck for that. You suck.
You suck.
Anyway, but you folks don't. We know. The good eggs don't suck.
Good.
What are you showing me your Post-it notes for?
I don't know. I just felt like
Matthew was showing me Post-its.
I felt like flicking my Post-it notes at you.
You flicked your Post-it notes. Anyway.
Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing.
And that is it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Goodbye.